Chapter 1. A laugh in the dark. The heavy velvet curtains of the Montague Theatre swayed gently as a draught from the backstage corridors whispered through the grand auditorium. The final act of the Masquerade of Death had reached its climax, and the audience held their breath as the leading lady, Geneviève Martel, delivered her last tragic monologue beneath the glow of a single spotlight. Then came the moment. Her co-star, Rupert Maltravers, was to fire a prop gun, a dramatic yet harmless act that would send her character tumbling into the arms of fate. The shot rang out. A moment of stunned silence followed. Geneviève stood frozen, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Then, to the horror of the audience, she staggered backward, clutching her chest. A slow, deliberate laugh echoed through the theatre, eerie and unplaceable. The crowd gasped. She collapsed. Screams erupted. The stage manager rushed forward, followed by a frantic Rupert, still holding the smoking revolver. The laughter, strange, mocking, persisted for a few seconds more, before fading into the confusion. By the time the house lights blazed to full brightness, Geneviève Martel was dead. The arrival of Hercule Poirot, it was precisely 10 minutes past midnight when Hercule Poirot arrived at the Montague Theatre. The legendary detective, his small frame impeccably dressed in a tailored suit of deep navy, stepped lightly through the now empty foyer. His moustache was groomed to absolute perfection, as always, and his eyes, sharp, meticulous, swept across the crime scene with quiet intensity. Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard was already there, shaking his head as he watched the medical examiner examine the actress's body. "A real mess, this one," Japp muttered as Poirot approached. "A staged murder, in front of a full audience, and yet no one saw a thing. Can you believe it?" Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Ah, mon ami, you underestimate the nature of illusion. When all eyes are drawn to one moment, it is often what lies beyond the stage that holds the true answer." Japp snorted. "Well, we do know one thing. This wasn't an accident. That prop gun was supposed to be harmless. Instead, it fired alive, round straight into Miss Martel's heart. Maltravers swears he had no idea." Poirot's gaze shifted toward the revolver, now placed carefully in an evidence bag. "And yet," he murmured, "one does not simply replace a stage prop with a live weapon without intent. Someone, mon cher Japp, wanted this tragedy to unfold exactly as it did." Japp sighed. "And there's something else." Just before she fell, the audience heard laughter, an eerie, unnatural kind of laugh, but no one saw who it came from. Poirot's eyes darkened slightly. "A laughing killer, Inspector. How very theatrical. I suspect we are dealing with a mind that enjoys the drama of murder as much as the crime itself." He turned toward the assembled cast and crew, each one pale-faced, their eyes filled with a mixture of grief, fear, and, perhaps, a touch of something else. "Come, Japp, let us begin. The stage is set, and the suspects await." Chapter 2. The curtain rises on deception. The grand dressing-room of the Montague Theatre was a space of artful vanity. Large mirrors framed in golden filigree, ornate chairs, and the faint lingering scent of powder and perfume. But tonight the room was devoid of its usual theatrical charm. Instead, the heavy air carried the weight of death. Hercule Poirot stepped inside, his small, methodical movements in stark contrast to the chaos still humming in the corners of the theatre. He took in the scene with an eye trained for the subtlest. Disturbances, an overturned powder box on the vanity, a wine-glass still marked by red lipstick, and a silk scarf hastily discarded on the floor. Clues, perhaps? Or merely the echoes of a life abruptly interrupted? Japp, who had followed him in, leaned against the doorway. "We've got the whole cast and crew gathered in the green room. Some are claiming they saw shadows in the wings. Others swear they heard the laughter coming from the private boxes." He rubbed his temple. Too many stories, and none of them match. Poirot nodded, adjusting the cuff of his pristine sleeve. "Bon. Then we shall allow them to speak, n'est-ce pas? The guilty party always reveals themselves, Inspector. It is merely a matter of listening." He turned on his heel and made his way toward the green room, where the suspects awaited. The gathering of suspects. The green room was dimly lit, a single chandelier casting long shadows over the anxious figures assembled inside. There were 8 of them, each one seemingly absorbed in their own silent torment. Some paced, some sat stiffly, while others whispered to one another with darting glances. Poirot cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice smooth, precise, "I regret that we must meet under such tragic circumstances. But let us not waste time. A woman has been murdered, a crime committed in plain sight, yet veiled in deception. It is now my task to remove this veil." He allowed his gaze to settle upon each person in turn, absorbing every flicker of expression. "Inspector Japp will ask for statements in due time, but I, Hercule Poirot, would prefer a more delicate approach." He clasped his hands behind his back. "So, let us begin the first interviews. Rupert Maltravers, the distraught co-star." Rupert Maltravers sat on the velvet sofa, hands shaking as he ran them through his dark, dishevelled hair. The leading man, once so confident on stage, now looked like a man haunted. "I swear to you, I had no idea the gun was real," he murmured. I've done that scene 100 times. It was supposed to be blanks. I don't even load the thing myself." Poirot studied him carefully. "And who does?" "The props master. Henry Lockwood. He's been handling stage weapons for years. I can't imagine he'd make a mistake like this." "Then we must ask, mon cher Maltravers, if it was indeed a mistake." Poirot's sharp gaze did not miss the way the man's fingers twitched. "Tell me, was Mademoiselle Martel distressed before the performance?" Maltravers hesitated. She was on edge. But then she always was. Before a show, she liked perfection." He gave a hollow laugh. "You knew if you made a mistake on stage, she'd let you hear about it later." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, a woman of strong opinions, non? Did she make enemies easily?" Rupert swallowed. "You don't become a star in this business without stepping on a few toes." Poirot stored the information away and gestured for the next person. Madeleine Carlyle, the jealous understudy. The second interviewee was a woman who had spent most of the evening in the background, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Madeleine Carlyle, Genevieve's understudy. Suppose you think I had something to do with it, she scoffed. The ambitious understudy takes out the star. How terribly cliché. Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. And yet, clichés are built upon truth, are they not? Madeleine's eyes narrowed. I had nothing to do with this. Yes, I wanted my chance. Who wouldn't? But Genevieve, she was ruthless. If she ever thought I was outshining her, she made sure the director knew it. She played games, Mr. Poirot. Ah, Poirot murmured. And did you play them too, Mademoiselle Carlyle? She stiffened. I wasn't the one holding the gun. A very convenient truth, no? Poirot studied her for a moment longer, before moving on. Henry Lockwood. The props master. Henry Lockwood was an older man with a grizzled beard and calloused hands. He looked as if he'd spent a lifetime in the theatre's shadows, tending to its illusions. It weren't me, he said gruffly. I checked that gun myself before the show. Blanks, same as always. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And yet a live round was fired. Lockwood's eyes darkened. Then someone switched it. Someone had to have gotten into the prop room, swapped out the ammunition. He ran a hand over his face. This is bad. This is real bad. Poirot noted the distress, but pressed on. Tell me, Monsieur Lockwood, was the gun ever out of your sight? Lockwood hesitated. I keep 'em locked up between shows, but tonight someone asked me to check the timing on the firing mechanism. I took it out for a minute. Who asked you? Derek Henshaw, the director. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Derek Henshaw, the overworked director. Derek Henshaw was a wiry man, his face lined from years of stress in the theatre business. Do you know what it's like to direct someone like Genevieve Martel? He snapped as soon as Poirot questioned him. She was a force of nature. Brilliant, yes, but insufferable. Poirot gave a slight nod. And did your tensions ever escalate beyond words? Henshaw exhaled sharply. What are you implying? That I killed my own star? Don't be ridiculous. And yet you had access to the prop gun before the performance. Henshaw blinked. That's absurd. He stopped, his mouth pressing into a thin line. Poirot smiled. It is interesting, is it not, that you begin by denying before knowing the accusation. Henshaw's hands clenched into fists. I wanted the scene to be perfect, that's all. I asked Henry to check the timing so that the shot and Genevieve's fall were in perfect sync. Nothing more. Poirot nodded but stored the information. Away. The shadow of suspicion. As the interviews continued, one thing became clear. Everyone had a reason to hate Genevieve Martel. A jealous understudy, a pressured director, a desperate co-star, a shaken props master. But Poirot knew something else. Hatred alone was not enough. Motive was one thing, means and opportunity quite another. And then there was the laughter, the eerie, mocking laughter that had haunted the crime scene. Poirot had not forgotten it. Someone in this very room had laughed as Genevieve Martel died, and Hercule Poirot intended to find out who. Chapter 3. Whispers of Deception. The green room still held the weight of unspoken truths. Hercule Poirot observed his suspects with keen interest, his eyes flitting between expressions, hands that fidgeted, feet that tapped anxiously against the floor. Every movement, every hesitation, every nervous glance told a story. Inspector Japp, standing with arms folded, exhaled sharply. "What do you think, Poirot? We've got plenty of motives, but nothing solid." Poirot gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Ah, mon cher Japp, but the puzzle is only just beginning to reveal its shape. We must be patient now. The guilty party, they are like the actor who forgets his lines. One misstep, and the truth will reveal itself." Japp grunted. "You think one of them slipped up?" Poirot straightened his cuffs. "Mais oui, and soon I will show you how." He turned back to the suspects, hands clasped neatly behind his back. "Now, mes amis, before we continue, I must ask, who among you heard the laughter?" A ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Rupert Maltravers, the shaken co-star, cleared his throat. "I heard it," he admitted, "right before the shot. I thought it was part of the audience, maybe someone who didn't realize the gunshot was real." Madeleine Carlyle, the understudy, scoffed. "That's absurd. Why would someone in the audience laugh at a murder?" Derek Henshaw, the director, pinched the bridge of his nose. "You're all acting like this is some ghost story. There's no mystery in it. It was someone backstage, someone who wanted to see Genevieve dead." Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, and tell me, Monsieur Henshaw, where were you standing when the laughter was heard?" The director frowned. "I was in the wings, watching the scene, just like always." Poirot turned to the props master, Henry Lockwood. "And you, Monsieur Lockwood?" Lockwood shifted uncomfortably. "I was in the side corridor, near the prop table. Didn't hear any laughter, though." Poirot tapped his chin. "Curious. It seems some of you heard it, and some did not." Japp raised an eyebrow. "What are you getting at?" Poirot only smiled. "I am getting at the truth, mon ami, and we shall arrive there soon enough." The first false lead. As the investigation progressed, a promising lead emerged, one that, for a brief moment, seemed to solve the case. A constable entered the green room carrying a small velvet pouch. "Sir," he addressed Japp, "we found this hidden in the understudy's dressing room." All eyes turned to Madeleine Carlyle. Japp took the pouch and opened it, his expression darkening. He turned it upside down, and a single bullet clinked onto the table. Poirot, ever composed, merely arched an eyebrow. Madeleine shot to her feet. "That's not mine." Japp frowned. "It was in your dressing room, miss. How do you explain that?" Madeleine's face flushed with anger. "Someone planted it. I have no reason to kill Genevieve." Poirot held up a hand. "Mademoiselle, calm yourself." He turned to the constable. "Where precisely was this found?" "In a small compartment inside her makeup case, sir." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "And tell me, when was her dressing room searched?" "Just now. We went through all the actors' rooms as you instructed." Poirot turned to Madeleine. "Mademoiselle, when was the last time you were in your dressing room?" She hesitated. Before the performance, I suppose." Poirot nodded. "You see, mon cher Japp, the bullet was meant to be discovered. It is too obvious, too convenient." Japp frowned. "So, you're saying she was framed?" Poirot smiled. "Precisely, and that tells us something very important." Madeleine's voice was edged with desperation. "Which is?" that the real killer is getting nervous, psychological. Game Poirot's gaze swept across the room. Let us assume for a moment that Mademoiselle Carlyle is innocent. If so, then what does this false clue tell us? Rupert Maltravers muttered. That someone wanted to make it look like she did it. Poirot gave an approving nod. Très bien. And who would benefit from such an accusation? Silence. Poirot took a step forward. The killer hoped to divert suspicion away from themselves. They believed that by framing another, they would escape scrutiny. But, mes amis, the attempt was clumsy, and that tells us something else. He let the words hang in the air before continuing. The killer is not as clever as they believe themselves to be. A tense shift rippled through the suspects. Poirot watched their reactions carefully. Derek Henshaw's jaw tightened. Rupert Maltravers looked away. Henry Lockwood adjusted his collar. Madeline merely crossed her arms. Poirot smiled. Ah, and now we are getting somewhere. A second crime, just as the tension in the room reached its peak, a sudden commotion erupted outside. A stagehand burst into the green room, breathless. Inspector, there's been another attack. Japp straightened. Where? The main stage, Henry Lockwood. He's been hurt. Poirot's expression darkened. Come, mon ami. The killer moves swiftly. They hurried toward the stage, where Henry Lockwood lay slumped, near the orchestra pit. A thin trickle of blood ran down the side of his head. A broken stage lamp lay beside him. Poirot knelt down, examining the scene. He has been struck from behind. He gently pressed 2 fingers to Lockwood's pulse. But he lives. Japp looked around. So now the killer's trying to silence people. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Perhaps Lockwood knew something he was not supposed to. Lockwood groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Poirot leaned in. Monsieur, can you hear me? Lockwood's lips parted. He struggled to speak, his voice hoarse. I saw. Poirot leaned closer. Saw what, mon ami? Lockwood's eyes darted toward the wings of the stage. Him. Poirot followed his gaze, but the shadows revealed nothing. Japp swore under his breath. Who did he see? Poirot stood, his eyes gleaming. That, Inspector, is what we must discover. The hidden clue Poirot examined the broken lamp. You see, mon cher Japp, the lamp was not meant to kill, merely to silence. Japp frowned. And that means? Poirot's lips curved slightly. That Lockwood knows the killer's identity, and the killer knows that he knows. Japp ran, a hand over his face. So, we're back where we started. Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami, we are closer than ever. He turned toward the suspects, who had followed them onto the stage. Each face held a mixture of fear and suspicion. The killer is growing desperate, Poirot said softly. And desperate people make mistakes. He let his gaze settle on each one in turn, before smiling. And I, Hercule Poirot, am very good at finding mistakes. Chapter 4. The Devil in the Details. The dim glow of the stage lights cast long shadows across the empty theatre, the air thick with unease. Hercule Poirot surveyed the scene with a contemplative expression, his eyes darting between the injured Henry Lockwood, the shattered lamp, and the cluster of suspects who had followed them onto the stage. Henry Lockwood's face was pale, his breathing shallow as he leaned against the orchestra pit. A crimson streak of blood marred his temple, though the wound appeared more shocking than severe. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. No, I saw him. Poirot crouched beside him, his expression gentle yet insistent. Courage, mon ami, who did you see? Lockwood's lips parted, but before he could answer, a commotion erupted from the wings. A stagehand rushed forward, his face flushed. Inspector Japp! We found something! Backstage, near the dressing rooms. Japp exchanged a glance with Poirot before straightening. What is it? The stagehand hesitated before producing a crumpled scrap of paper. This was stuffed under the costume rack. Poirot extended his hand. Permit me. The note was hastily scrawled. Ink smeared in places. He knows. Get rid of him. A heavy silence followed. Japp's jaw clenched. Looks like someone wasn't taking any chances with Lockwood. Poirot tapped the paper against his palm. But tell me, my dear Japp, does this note not seem, how do you say, too convenient? Japp frowned. What do you mean? Poirot smiled faintly. Think, mon ami, why would the killer leave such an incriminating message in a place it could be so easily found? Japp scratched his head. Unless they wanted us to find it? Poirot nodded. Exactement. It is an attempt at misdirection, just like the bullet in Mademoiselle Carlyle's dressing room. The murderer wishes to point us away from the truth. Rupert Maltravers, still clutching his cigarette-holder with trembling fingers, scoffed. So we have another false lead. Wonderful! Poirot gave a measured look. Not false, Monsieur Maltravers. Merely incomplete. There is truth hidden within every deception, if one knows how to look. He turned his gaze back to Lockwood. Monsieur, can you recall anything else? Anything at all? Lockwood winced as he shifted. It was dark, but I saw movement. Someone lurking near the stage lights. A man. He wore a dark coat. Poirot nodded. Très bien. That tells us more than you realize. Japp exhaled. All right, so we're looking for a man with a dark coat. He glanced at the suspects. Well, that narrows it down to half of you. Poirot smoothed his lapel. Patience, mon ami. The truth is close. We must only draw it out. A fatal performance. As the night deepened, Poirot gathered the suspects back in the green room. The tension in the air was palpable. Every movement scrutinized, every word carefully chosen. Poirot, standing near the center of the room, clasped, his hands behind his back. We now know that the murderer attempted to frame Mademoiselle Carlyle. We know they feared what Monsieur Lockwood had seen, and we know they wished to divert suspicion at every turn. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But what if I told you, mes amis, that I already know the identity of the murderer? A sharp intake of breath swept through the room. Japp raised an eyebrow. You do? Poirot nodded. Oui. But before I reveal all, let us indulge in a little exercise. Consider for a moment the peculiar nature of the crime. A murder on stage, a laugh in the darkness, a bullet switched with a blank. He turned his gaze to Rupert Maltravers. Monsieur Maltravers, you were closest to the victim when she was shot, were you not? Rupert hesitated. Yes, but I told you, I was acting. I had no idea the gun had been tampered with. Poirot inclined his head. Ah, but you see, monsieur, I find that difficult to believe. You are an actor, no? A performer of great experience. Surely you would notice the difference in weight between a loaded gun and one with a blank. Rupert's face paled. That's ridiculous. The adrenaline, the moment. It was all so fast. Poirot tapped his chin. Perhaps, or perhaps you knew the truth all along. Madeleine Carlyle folded her arms. You're saying Rupert was in on it? Poirot smiled. No, mademoiselle. I am saying that he was meant to appear guilty, just as you were. Japp frowned. Then who's the real culprit? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Let us return to the laughter, mes amis. The sound that sent a chill through the room. Tell me, who benefits from such a distraction? Derek Henshaw cleared his throat. Anyone who wanted confusion. Anyone who wanted to create chaos in the moment. Poirot nodded approvingly. Très bien, monsieur. Henshaw. Chaos is often the ally of the guilty. His gaze shifted to the nervous props master. Monsieur Lockwood, tell me, what was the last thing you saw before you were attacked? Lockwood hesitated. I saw someone moving backstage, near the props table. Poirot smiled. And what was kept at the props table? There was a beat of silence before Lockwood's eyes widened. The spare gun. Poirot gave a slight bow. Exactement. Japp's expression darkened. So the murderer was near the props before the attack. Poirot nodded. Yes, and they had the perfect opportunity to switch the gun. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Which means, mes amis, the killer is among us, the murderer's mistake. The room fell silent. Poirot took a step forward, his voice calm yet commanding. The criminal believed themselves clever. They believed they could manipulate the scene, plant false clues, and remain undetected. He turned toward the mirror lining the far wall. His own reflection stared back at him, sharp and precise. Poirot tapped his temple. But they underestimated one thing, the little grey cells. He turned sharply. Monsieur Henshaw! Derek Henshaw's head snapped up. What? Poirot's gaze locked onto him. You were standing in the wings, were you not, watching the scene unfold? Henshaw swallowed hard. Of course I was. That's what directors do. Poirot's smile was razor-sharp. Ah, but you see, monsieur, I find that quite impossible. Henshaw stiffened. What are you talking about? Poirot gestured to Lockwood. Monsieur Lockwood saw someone near the props table, that someone tampered with the gun. And yet, when we asked where you were, you said you were watching from the wings. He took a step closer. Which means, mon ami, you lied. The room held its breath. Henshaw's face darkened. This is ridiculous. You're grasping at straws. Poirot chuckled. Am I? Then tell me, why was your coat found backstage near the crime scene? Henshaw's fingers twitched. Japp narrowed his eyes. Is that true? Poirot nodded. Oui. It was retrieved from behind the stage curtain. Tell me, Monsieur Henshaw, how did it get there? Henshaw licked his lips. I don't know. Someone must have put it there. Poirot's voice softened. Or perhaps, mon ami, you simply forgot to dispose of it. Henshaw's breath quickened. This is insane. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Monsieur, the game is over. For a moment, Henshaw stood frozen. Then, with a sudden movement, he bolted for the door. Japp lunged. "Oh, no, you don't!" The inspector grabbed Henshaw by the arm, twisting it behind his back. The director struggled for a moment before slumping in defeat. Poirot exhaled, and so the curtain falls. Japp pulled out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest, Henshaw." Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "And now, mon ami, we have only one thing left to do." Japp glanced at him. "What's that?" Poirot smiled. "Explain, of course." Chapter 5. The mind is the killer's stage. The tension in the green room was thick as Inspector Japp tightened the cuffs around Derek Henshaw's wrists. The once composed director had lost all traces of his theatrical charm. Sweat beaded his forehead, and his breath came in shallow gasps. Madeline. Carlyle clutched the edge of a chair, her voice trembling. So it was Derek all along? Poirot, standing with perfect poise, gave a slight shake of his head. "Non, mademoiselle, the question is not so simple. The act of pulling a trigger does not make one a murderer. It is the intention, the deception, the mind behind the crime." Japp scoffed. "He tampered with the gun, attacked Lockwood, and tried to throw us off with fake clues. If that doesn't make him guilty, I don't know what does." Poirot smiled, but there was something sharp behind it. "Ah, mon cher Japp, but that is exactly what we must determine. Is Monsieur Henshaw guilty of everything? Or is he but one piece in a much grander performance?" Henshaw let out a shaky breath. "This is absurd. I never meant for any of this to happen." Japp frowned. "That's not much of a defence." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, but it is a clue, non?" He took a slow step forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "Tell me, Monsieur Henshaw, what exactly did you never mean to happen? The attack on Monsieur Lockwood? The switching of the bullets? Or the murder itself?" Henshaw hesitated. His gaze darted around the room as though searching for an escape. He swallowed. "I knew about the gun, but I swear I didn't kill anyone. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Rupert Maltravers scoffed. "Oh, spare us the dramatics, Derek." Poirot's gaze flicked to Maltravers, his expression unreadable. "You sound very certain, Monsieur Maltravers." The actor hesitated, shifting his cigarette holder between his fingers. "What I mean is, he's clearly been caught. There's no point in putting on a show." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, but you see, monsieur, theatre is exactly what we must consider. For this crime," he gestured around the room, "was staged with great care. Every moment, every clue, every misdirection, all perfectly orchestrated." He turned back to Henshaw. "And you, mon ami, you were the director of this grand illusion." Henshaw's lips trembled. I didn't kill her." Poirot's gaze bore into him. "Then tell me, Monsieur Henshaw, who did? The director's secret, eh?" A heavy silence settled over the room. Henshaw's fingers twitched against the metal of his cuffs. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now flickered with fear. Poirot waited. He knew the moment was fragile. The slightest pressure, the right words, and the truth would spill forth. Finally, Henshaw exhaled. His shoulders slumped. "I didn't mean for Lillian to die," Madeline gasped. "You admit it, then? You set up the gun?" Henshaw shook his head. "No, I mean, yes, but not to kill her." He swallowed. "It was supposed to be a warning, Just a scare." Japp frowned. "A scare? You expect us to believe that?" Poirot raised a hand. "Let him speak." Henshaw licked his lips. "Lillian, she was going to ruin everything. She found out something about," he hesitated, "about the money." Rupert Maltravers stiffened. "What money?" Henshaw let out a hollow laugh. "Oh, don't act innocent, Rupert. You were part of it too." Maltravers paled. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Poirot's smile was razor-sharp. "Ah, but I do." He turned to the room, his hands moving expressively. "Let us consider the facts, mes amis. A theatre production, riddled with financial troubles, a lead actress who knew too much, and a carefully staged crime meant to silence her." His gaze locked onto Maltravers. "Monsieur, your role in this affair is far greater than you let on." Maltravers took a step back. "This is ridiculous." Poirot raised a brow. "Is it? Then allow me to ask you this. Where were you just before the performance began?" Maltravers hesitated. "In my dressing room." Poirot tutted. "Ah, but we know that is not true, non? A witness saw you near the props table." Japp stiffened. "Wait, you mean Maltravers was near the gun too?" Poirot nodded. "Exactement." Maltravers let out a harsh laugh. "This is insane. I had no reason to kill Lillian." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, but you did. Or rather, you had a reason to want her silenced." The colour drained from Maltravers' face. "That's not—" Poirot stepped forward. "Monsieur, you and Monsieur Henshaw have been partners in this affair. Financial fraud, non? A scheme to siphon theatre funds for your own gain." The room erupted in murmurs. Japp cursed under his breath. "So that's what this is about." Poirot nodded. "Oui, Mademoiselle Lillian discovered your secret, did she not?" Maltravers didn't respond. His fingers curled into fists. Poirot continued. "You panicked. You needed her silenced. And so a plan was formed." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "A fake gun. A staged warning. But somewhere along the way, it turned into murder." Henshaw's breath hitched. I didn't mean for her to die." Poirot's voice was gentle yet firm. "But someone did." His gaze sharpened. "The question, mes amis, is who changed the plan?" The final twist Japp straightened. "You're saying there was another player?" Poirot nodded. "Oui, one who saw an opportunity and took it." His eyes swept across the room. "Consider the facts. The blank was replaced with a real bullet. The laughter, a chilling touch, designed to unnerve. And then an attack on Monsieur Lockwood to ensure silence." He turned sharply. "Monsieur Maltravers, did you ever touch the gun before the performance?" Maltravers hesitated. "No." Poirot nodded. "And yet the gun was switched, which means—" His eyes flashed. "The true murderer is someone who had access to the gun after the switch was made." Japp's expression darkened. "Then who?" Poirot's voice was like a blade. "The one person who had the final opportunity." Madeleine Carlyle. The actress froze. For a moment, no one spoke. Then she let out a breathless laugh. "This is absurd." Poirot tilted his head. "Is it, mademoiselle? You were the only one who handled the gun after the switch. The last person to touch it before the fatal shot." Madeleine's eyes darted between them. This is ridiculous." I loved Lillian." Poirot's voice was soft, almost pitying. "No, mademoiselle, you envied her." A tremor passed through her. Poirot took a slow step forward. "You saw an opportunity, did you not? A perfect crime, a staged warning gone wrong, and so you replaced the blank with a real bullet." Japp cursed. "Good God!" Madeleine's breath came in short bursts. You can't prove anything." Poirot's smile was knowing. "Ah, but I can." He held up a small object, a pearl. "From your bracelet, mademoiselle, found near the props table." Madeleine's face crumbled. "No." Poirot's voice was gentle. "It is over." For a moment, she stood frozen. Then her knees buckled. Japp caught her by the arm. "Madeleine Carlyle, you're under arrest." Poirot exhaled. "And so, mes amis, the curtain falls." A long silence stretched. Then Japp shook his head. "You really are something else, Poirot." Poirot smiled. "But of course." He adjusted his cuffs. "Now, mon cher Japp, shall we discuss what comes next?" Chapter 6. A Mind Unmasked. The heavy silence in the room was punctuated only by the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Madeleine Carlyle stood motionless, her face pale as Inspector Japp's firm grip held her in place. The once radiant actress, whose beauty had commanded the stage, now appeared diminished. Her elegance cracked under the weight of Poirot's relentless logic. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You have no proof?" Poirot's lips curled, ever so slightly. "Ah, but I do, mademoiselle." Japp adjusted his grip on her arm. "You might as well start talking, Miss Carlyle. We've got enough to see you behind bars for a long time." She let out a bitter laugh. "You think I killed Lillian out of envy? That's ridiculous. Yes, I resented her, but murder. I'm not a monster." Poirot tilted his head, his sharp gaze dissecting her every movement. "No, mademoiselle, not a monster, a performer. And as any great actress knows, the finest performances require careful preparation. Shall we examine yours?" He began to pace, his hands neatly clasped behind his back. "We know that Monsieur Henshaw and Monsieur Maltravers were involved in fraudulent dealings regarding the theatre's funds. We also know that Mademoiselle Lillian discovered their deception. That knowledge made her dangerous." His eyes flicked toward Maltravers, who was now slumped in a chair, face buried in his hands. "Monsieur Maltravers, did you and Monsieur Henshaw discuss how to keep Mademoiselle Lillian silent?" Maltravers' voice was hoarse. "Yes, but we weren't going to kill her. We just wanted to frighten her, make her think she was in danger so she'd back off." Japp muttered. "That's a pretty idiotic plan, if you ask me." Poirot sighed. "It was reckless, yes, but not murderous. The gun was supposed to contain only blanks, a staged warning, but then—" He gestured with his hand, as if revealing a grand illusion. The switch occurred. The blank was replaced with a real bullet. His eyes locked onto Madeleine. "You, mademoiselle, were the last person to handle the gun before it was fired." She shook her head wildly. "That doesn't mean I switched the bullets." Poirot sighed. "Let us retrace the sequence of events. The original plan, conceived by Monsieur Henshaw and Maltravers, was to frighten Lillian. A single blank round was placed in the gun. But then you, mademoiselle, saw an opportunity." His voice softened. You were not the mastermind of the fraud, nor were you involved in the deception at first. But you knew the truth about it, did you not? Madeleine's lips trembled. I heard things. Poirot nodded. And you were tired of living in Lillian's shadow. You were the understudy, the second choice, the one the audience ignored when she took centre stage. Japp exhaled through his nose. So, you decided to get rid of her. Madeleine remained, silent. Poirot's voice was almost gentle. I imagine you told yourself it was poetic justice, that it was not murder, merely destiny. A shadow passed over Madeleine's face. For the first time, her mask of defiance cracked. Poirot continued. The switch had to be made at the very last moment, after the gun was already in position, but before it was fired. And, as we now know, your pearl was found near the props table. He held up the tiny pearl between his fingers. The smallest mistake, mademoiselle, but even the grandest of illusions can be undone by the slightest flaw. Madeleine let out a slow, shaking breath. I didn't mean for it to happen like that, Japp scoffed. That's what they all say. Madeleine's hands curled into fists. I wanted her gone, but not like that. I only wanted to scare her, to ruin her moment, to make her feel small for once. I thought I could. Her voice broke. Poirot watched her, his expression unreadable. You thought you could control fate. Tears welled in her eyes. And then she was dead. The shot fired, the laughter echoed, and I realized I'd won. But it didn't feel like a victory. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Japp shook his head. I'll never understand you lot. All this for what? A role? A bit of fame? Madeleine let out a hollow laugh. It was never about the fame. Poirot's voice was soft. Then what was it about, mademoiselle? She looked at him, eyes empty. Control. Poirot nodded. Ah, and now, mademoiselle, you have none. The curtain falls Japp signalled for his men to take Madeleine away. She didn't resist. The fight had left her entirely. As the door shut behind them, Maltravers let out a deep sigh, rubbing a hand over his face. What now? Japp frowned. You and Henshaw are still in plenty of trouble for that fraud business. Henshaw groaned. Of course we are. Poirot turned to Japp. I leave that in your capable hands, mon cher. Japp smirked. Nice of you to say, but let's be honest. You'll probably figure out half of it before I even finish my paperwork. Poirot gave a small bow. It is possible. Maltravers looked at Poirot, his expression oddly grateful. You know, as much as I hate to admit it, I think I'm relieved. Poirot raised a brow. Ah? Maltravers exhaled. At least now I know how it all ends. That's better than living with the suspense, Poirot chuckled. Ah, but mon ami, is that not the tragedy of life? There is always another act yet to come. Maltravers let out a small humorless laugh. Japp clapped a hand on Poirot's shoulder. Well, another case closed, thanks to your little grey cells. Poirot straightened his cuffs. Indeed, the inspector smirked. What now? Off to solve another mystery. Poirot smiled. Ah, but of course. And with that, he turned on his heel, his immaculate shoes clicking against the polished floor. The curtain had fallen on this case. But somewhere, another mystery waited to be unravelled. Chapter 7. The Final Puzzle. The case, it seemed, was closed. Madeleine Carlyle had been led away in Inspector Japp's firm grip, her fate sealed by her own admission of guilt. The atmosphere at the Gilded Rose Theatre was thick with unspoken relief. Yet a peculiar tension remained, one that Poirot could not ignore. As he stood in the grand foyer of the theatre, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine jacket, he observed the remaining players in this drama. Arthur Maltravers sat slumped in a chair, his face lined with exhaustion. Henry Henshaw was pacing near the entrance, rubbing his temples. Eleanor Hartley, the theatre's longtime manager, had taken a seat in the corner, her arms wrapped around herself as if warding off an invisible chill. Japp returned from escorting Madeleine to a police carriage. "Well, that's that," he muttered, stretching his neck. "You did it again, Poirot. Another murder solved." Poirot, however, did not share in the triumph. He frowned slightly, his fingertips pressed together in deep thought. "Mon cher Japp," he said slowly, "I am not so certain." Japp sighed. "Come off it, Poirot. You got your confession, didn't you?" Poirot nodded. "Oui, a confession, yes. And yet, something does not sit quite right with me." Henshaw scoffed. "What now, Poirot? You don't think she did it?" Poirot turned his sharp gaze to him. "Oh, she was involved, without a doubt. But was she truly the one who orchestrated the entire affair? Or is there yet another layer to this crime?" The room grew silent. Maltravers looked up, his eyes wary. "What are you saying?" Poirot began to pace. "Let us examine the facts once more. Madeleine Carlyle had motive, yes. But her confession was, how do you say, incomplete." Japp furrowed his brow. "She admitted to switching the bullets. What more do you want?" Poirot paused. "Indeed, she admitted to switching the bullets. But I ask you this, mon ami, when did she do so?" Eleanor, who had remained silent, spoke now. "She must have done it just before the scene. That's when she was near the props table." Poirot shook his head. "No, no, that would be too obvious, would it not? If she was seen near the props table just before the performance, someone might have noticed her making the switch." Henshaw frowned. "So, what are you getting at?" Poirot's gaze flickered toward him. "I believe that Madeleine was not the one who made the switch at all." The room erupted in murmurs. Japp groaned. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Poirot! You're saying someone else switched the bullets. Then why did she confess?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, mon ami, that is the question, is it not? Why confess to a crime she did not entirely commit?" Henshaw's face darkened. "You're saying someone manipulated her?" Poirot turned to him. "Exactement. Someone who knew of her jealousy, her bitterness. Someone who knew she had handled the gun and could be implicated if things went awry." Eleanor gasped. "Then who?" Poirot looked at each of them in turn, his keen gaze lingering on Maltravers. "Tell me, monsieur, do you recall where you were just before the performance began?" Maltravers' expression tightened. I was in the dressing room, preparing." Poirot nodded. "And yet, one of the stage hands recalled seeing you near the props table minutes before the scene commenced." Japp's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying—" Poirot continued, his voice calm yet razor-sharp. "Madeleine Carlyle was guilty, but she was also a pawn. The true mastermind of this crime was someone else entirely. Someone who had much more to lose than a coveted role in the theatre. The room tensed. Maltravers' face grew pale. "You think I—" Poirot held up a finger. Do not deny it so quickly, monsieur. Let us examine the psychology of this crime." He took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving Maltravers. "You and Henshaw were involved in a fraudulent scheme, oui? Lillian had discovered your deception. If she went to the authorities, you would have lost everything." Maltravers swallowed hard. "So," Poirot continued, "Madeleine was the perfect scapegoat. You knew of her resentment toward Lillian. You saw an opportunity. If the murder could be pinned on her, you would be free. And so you manipulated her." Eleanor gasped. Poirot nodded. "You switched the bullets before the gun ever reached Madeleine's hands. You let her believe she had made the switch, feeding her guilt, ensuring that when the time came, she would take the blame." Japp took a step closer to Maltravers. "Well, Maltravers, got anything to say?" Maltravers looked from Poirot to Japp, his hands shaking. Then, suddenly, he let out a hollow laugh. You're remarkable, Poirot." His voice was weak. I thought I had planned it so well." Poirot gave a small bow. "Alas, monsieur, the truth has a way of revealing itself." Maltravers collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Japp pulled out his handcuffs. "Well, looks like we've got ourselves the real murderer." Poirot exhaled, adjusting his tie. "Justice, mon ami, is like the finest of puzzles. It must be solved with precision." As Japp led Maltravers away, Henshaw sank into a seat, shaking his head. "I can't believe it. He let Madeleine take the fall." Poirot nodded solemnly. "A most cruel deception indeed." Eleanor wiped her eyes. "So, what will happen to her?" Poirot sighed. "She will still face consequences for her involvement, but the weight of murder will no longer rest upon her shoulders." Japp smirked at Poirot. "You know, one of these days I'd like to solve a case before you do." Poirot chuckled. "Ah, mon cher Japp, when that day comes I shall retire." Japp laughed. "Well, let's hope it never comes then." Poirot nodded, smiling. "Indeed." And with that, the case was truly closed. But as Poirot stepped out into the cold London night, he could not help but wonder how many more intricate webs of deception lay waiting to be unravelled. He straightened his jacket. No matter, Hercule Poirot was always ready. Chapter 8. Shadows of Guilt. The case was closed, or so it seemed. Maltravers had been arrested, his carefully woven web of deception unravelled by Hercule Poirot's meticulous logic. Madeleine Carlyle, though not wholly innocent, had been spared the full weight of the crime. Inspector Japp was satisfied. The newspapers had their headline, and the Gilded Rose Theatre had returned to its usual whispers of scandal and drama. Yet, as Poirot sat in his London apartment that evening, sipping his warm tisane, something still gnawed at the edges of his mind. There was a detail, a small, seemingly insignificant thing, that did not sit right. Hastings, sitting across from him, stretched with a yawn. "Well, Poirot, you certainly saved the day once again. I must say, I thought you had wrapped this one up quite neatly." Poirot tapped his fingers against the delicate porcelain cup. "Oui, Hastings. Neatly, yes, and yet—" Hastings frowned. "And yet?" Poirot shook his head. There is something small. It evades me, mon ami, but it is there." Hastings chuckled. "You're overthinking it. The case was clear. Maltravers wanted Lillian gone, so he manipulated Madeline. A rather devious plot, but you exposed him." Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui. And yet, tell me, Hastings, what was the significance of the laughter?" Hastings blinked. "The laughter?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Oui, the laughing killer. Why did the witnesses hear laughter at the precise moment the gun fired?" Hastings hesitated. "Well, nerves, perhaps. The shock of the gunshot." Poirot tapped his temple. "No, the laughter was deliberate. But whose laughter was it?" Hastings shifted uncomfortably. "You think it wasn't Maltravers?" Poirot stood, walking to the window, where the dim lights of London flickered in the distance. Maltravers was calculating, oui. But the laughter. There was something theatrical about it, something unexpected. Hastings scratched his chin. Well, it was a theatre after all. Poirot turned sharply. "Precisely, mon ami. A theatre, full of actors. And yet the laughter came from the audience, not the stage." Hastings' eyes widened. "Wait, are you saying the real killer might not have been Maltravers after all?" Poirot sighed. "It is a possibility we must consider." Before Hastings could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Poirot moved swiftly to the door and opened it, revealing a pale, shaken Eleanor Hartley. "Miss Hartley!" Hastings exclaimed. "What's the matter?" She stepped inside hesitantly, wringing her hands. "Monsieur Poirot, I had to see you. I haven't been able to sleep. Something is terribly wrong." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "Tell me everything, mademoiselle." She took a deep breath. "It's about the night of the murder. There's something I didn't tell you before." Poirot nodded, encouraging her to continue. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "I was in the wings during the performance. Just as Lillian was about to fire the gun, I heard a sound behind me. A faint rustling, as if someone were moving in the dark." Hastings frowned. "Couldn't it have been one of the stagehands?" Shook her head. "I thought so too at first, but then I heard laughter." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Laughter?" She nodded. "Yes, a soft, eerie laugh. It sent chills down my spine. And then the gun fired." Poirot leaned forward. "Mademoiselle, this is of the utmost importance. You are certain it was before the gun fired?" Eleanor swallowed. "Yes, just seconds before." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. The laughter was not a reaction. It had preceded the murder. Poirot stood abruptly. "Mademoiselle, I must ask, who among the theatre staff had reason to despise Lillian Hartley?" Eleanor hesitated. "Well, there was Henry Henshaw. He always argued with her about the theatre's finances, but—" Poirot steepled his fingers. "But," she bit her lip, "there's someone else, someone who never got along with Lillian, who resented her success." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Who?" Eleanor hesitated. Then, in a hushed voice, she whispered, "Jocelyn Raines." Hastings looked puzzled. "Jocelyn Raines? The understudy?" Poirot nodded slowly. "A woman who spent years in the shadows, always second to Lillian. And yet, on the night of the murder, she had the greatest opportunity." Hastings paled. "You don't think—" Poirot's expression darkened. It is time we paid a visit to Mademoiselle Raines. The final confrontation. Jocelyn Raines' flat was modest, tucked away in a quiet street. Poirot knocked sharply, and after a long pause, the door creaked open. Jocelyn stood in the doorway, her face weary but composed. "Monsieur Poirot," she greeted coolly, "to what do I owe this visit?" Poirot stepped inside. "Ah, mademoiselle, you must forgive my intrusion, but I find myself haunted by a most peculiar detail." Jocelyn raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Poirot folded his hands. "The laughter!" A flicker of something passed across her face, gone in an instant. "I'm not sure I follow." Poirot smiled slightly. "Come now, mademoiselle. You are a trained actress. Surely you understand the power of a well-timed laugh." Jocelyn's expression remained unreadable. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot took a step closer. "That you, Mademoiselle Raines, were the true mastermind behind this crime." Hastings gasped. Jocelyn's hand twitched at her side. Poirot continued, his voice calm but relentless. "You hated Lillian Hartley. She had everything you wanted, the fame, the roles, the adoration. You knew Maltravers and Henshaw had their own troubles, and you saw an opportunity." Jocelyn's jaw tightened. "That's absurd." Poirot tilted his head. "Is it? You switched the bullets yourself, long before the performance. You made Madeleine believe she had done it. You let Maltravers take the blame, knowing that if the authorities dug deeper, they would find his financial crimes. And then, at the moment of the murder, you laughed, because you had won." Jocelyn's breath hitched. Poirot leaned in. "A brilliant performance, mademoiselle. But now the final curtain must fall." For a long moment there was silence. Then Jocelyn laughed, soft, at first, then louder, until it echoed in the small apartment. Poirot watched her, unflinching. She exhaled. "Well, Monsieur Poirot, I must say you do have a flair for the dramatic." Poirot did not smile. "Murder is not a performance, mademoiselle, and the stage you have chosen leads only to the gallows." Jocelyn's expression turned cold. "So, what now?" Poirot stepped aside as Inspector Japp entered. His eyes locked on Jocelyn. "Now, Miss Raines, you're coming with me." For the first time Jocelyn faltered, but there was no escape. The game was over. Chapter 9. The Truth in the Mirror. Jocelyn Raines was led away in handcuffs, her composed expression cracking for the first time as Jocelyn Raines was led away in handcuffs, her composed expression cracking for the first time as the reality of her fate set in. Inspector Japp, ever the practical man, gave a satisfied nod as he watched her disappear into the police carriage. "Well, that's that," Japp said, turning to Poirot. "You certainly took your time getting there, but I'll admit you got the right one in the end." Poirot, standing impeccably straight with his hands clasped behind his back, merely raised an eyebrow. "Patience, mon cher Japp, is the greatest tool of the detective. To rush is to stumble." Japp chuckled. "Yeah, well, you didn't seem like you were in much of a hurry." Poirot smiled faintly. "Haste is the enemy of precision, and in this case it was precision that mattered most." Hastings, standing nearby, shook his head. "I still can't believe it. All this time we were focused on Maltravers and poor Madeleine. And yet the real culprit was right there, hidden in the wings." Poirot sighed. It is the way of things, mon ami. The true criminal often does not lurk in the shadows, but stands in plain sight, merely waiting for their moment. Japp exhaled, stuffing his hands into his pockets. I'll take care of the paperwork. But tell me, Poirot, was there ever a moment when you doubted? Poirot's expression grew serious. Non, mon ami. There was never doubt, only the search for proof. With that, Japp took his leave, and Poirot and Hastings returned to their flat. But the case was not yet fully settled in Poirot's mind. A final puzzle back at their lodgings, Poirot sat before the fire, deep in thought. The flickering flames cast shadows across his face, and for once the great detective looked troubled. Hastings, pouring himself a nightcap, studied his friend. Poirot, you don't look quite as satisfied as you usually do after solving a case. What's on your mind? Poirot glanced up, his sharp eyes narrowing. Something remains unresolved, Hastings. Hastings frowned. Unresolved? But we found the killer. Jocelyn Raines is guilty beyond a doubt. Poirot leaned forward, steepling his fingers. But tell me, mon ami, have you considered why? Hastings blinked. Why she did it? Of course, jealousy, ambition. She resented Lillian for taking the roles she wanted. Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings, not the surface motive. I speak of the deeper why. The true reason behind her. Hatred. Hastings hesitated. I suppose that is a bit of a mystery. Poirot nodded. Exactement. And that, my friend, is what troubles me. A crime is never merely an act of impulse. It is a story with a beginning long before the murder itself. Hastings took a seat. So, what do we do? Poirot smiled, slightly. We pay one last visit. Hastings sighed. I had a feeling you'd say that. An unfinished story. The next morning, Poirot and Hastings visited the Gilded Rose Theatre one last time. The grand building, once buzzing with energy, now felt oddly hollow. The stage was empty, the audience seats dark. Only a few staff remained, quietly tending to the remnants of a performance that would never resume. Eleanor Hartley, still pale from the previous night's revelations, greeted them hesitantly. Monsieur Poirot, I didn't expect to see you. Again, Poirot inclined his head. Mademoiselle, you have been most helpful, but I must ask you one final question. She swallowed. Of course. Poirot's gaze was sharp. Did Jocelyn Raines always hate Lillian? Eleanor frowned. Well, yes, I suppose she did. She never liked how Lillian got the best roles. She wanted to be a star herself. Poirot nodded. But was there an event, a moment, that turned rivalry into hatred? Eleanor hesitated. Now that you mention it, there was something. Poirot leaned forward. Go on. Eleanor took a deep breath. It was about 2 years ago. Jocelyn was supposed to take the lead role in the Queen's tragedy, but at the last moment the director chose Lillian instead. Jocelyn was devastated. But what made it worse was that Lillian, she didn't handle it well. Hastings raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Eleanor looked uncomfortable. She humiliated Jocelyn. She made fun of her in front of everyone, called her a shadow, not a star. Laughed at her. Poirot's expression darkened. Laughed at her, you say? Eleanor nodded. Yes. And that night, Jocelyn disappeared for weeks. When she returned, she was different. Colder, more calculating. Poirot sighed. Then the truth is clear." Hastings frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot turned away. The laughing killer Hastings was created long before the murder. That night, 2 years ago, when Lillian laughed at Jocelyn, that was when the real crime began. Hastings shook his head. "So, you're saying, what? That Lillian brought this on herself?" Poirot's gaze was sorrowful. "No, Hastings, no one deserves murder. But cruelty leaves scars, and sometimes those scars turn into something much darker." Eleanor looked down. "I never thought about it like that." Poirot nodded. "Few do." With that, Poirot turned to leave. The case was solved, justice had been served, but in the end there were no true victors. As he stepped into the bright morning light, Poirot muttered to himself, "In the theatre of life, Hastings, laughter can sometimes be the most dangerous weapon of all." Chapter 10. Curtain Call for a Killer. The cold morning air bit at Poirot's cheeks as he stepped out of the Gilded Rose Theatre with Hastings at his side. The case was, in all practical senses, closed. Jocelyn Raines had been apprehended. The authorities were satisfied, and justice had been served. And yet, as Poirot adjusted his immaculate cuffs, his expression remained troubled. Hastings, ever perceptive when it came to his friend's moods, sighed. "Poirot, what is it now? Surely you can't still be brooding over this case?" Poirot did not immediately respond. He took in the London streets, the vendors opening their stalls, the morning commuters, the hum of a city unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded just nights before. Finally, he spoke. "Hastings, tell me, have you ever considered the weight of a single moment?" Hastings frowned. "I'm not sure I follow." Poirot turned to him. "A moment, mon ami. A mere few seconds that, like a stone cast into a pond, ripples outward, changing everything." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "You mean Jocelyn's humiliation? The way Lillian laughed at her?" Poirot nodded. "Oui, that was the moment. That was when the crime truly began. Not last night, not a week ago, but 2 years ago, when a single act of cruelty set forth a chain of events that led to murder." Hastings exhaled. "You're not saying that excuses what Jocelyn did?" Poirot's expression was grave. "No, Hastings, there is never an excuse for murder, but there is always an understanding of it. And that understanding, it troubles me." They walked in silence for a time, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. Reflections on the past back at their flat, Poirot settled into his chair, eyes flicking toward the small mirror on the mantel. It was an old habit of his, to check his reflection before deep contemplation. Hastings sat across from him, pouring himself a cup of tea. "You know, Poirot, you've solved plenty of cases, but this one has you more thoughtful than usual. Why?" Poirot sighed. "Because, Hastings, this case has reminded me of something I cannot ignore. The fragility of the human mind, the danger of emotions left unchecked, and most of all, the power of perception." Hastings took a sip of his tea. "I'm still not sure what you mean." Poirot leaned forward. "Let us consider Jocelyn. She was not an inherently wicked woman. No, she was talented, driven, intelligent. But she was also insecure, vulnerable. And when she was humiliated, when Lillian's laughter cut through her pride, it planted a seed that, over time, grew into obsession, into hatred. Hastings frowned. But people are laughed at all the time. They don't all become killers. Poirot nodded. Oui, mon ami. But it is not the act of being laughed at that matters. It is how the mind receives it. Some dismiss such slights, others dwell on them, and some, like Jocelyn, let them fester until they consume everything. Hastings set his teacup down. You're saying she chose to become this way? Poirot sighed. A choice, Hastings, is rarely made in a single moment. Rather, it is the sum of many small moments, each one pushing a person toward their final decision. Hastings shook his head. Well, it's all very philosophical, but in the end she murdered someone. That's all that matters, isn't it? Poirot gave a small, sad smile. Perhaps. But tell me, Hastings, if we could go back in time and stop Lillian from laughing at Jocelyn that day, do you think this tragedy would have happened? Hastings hesitated. I don't know. Poirot nodded. Neither do I. And for a long while neither man spoke. Justice and consequence a week. Later, Jocelyn Raines was brought to trial. The courtroom was filled with onlookers, journalists eager for a dramatic headline, theatre patrons shocked at the dark turn of events, and former colleagues who had once called Jocelyn a friend. Poirot and Hastings sat in attendance, observing as the case unfolded. Jocelyn sat stiff-backed in the defendant's chair, her expression unreadable. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man with a voice like a whip, laid out the case mercilessly, a crime of jealousy, of calculated malice. The defendant, unable to tolerate the success of another, plotted to remove her rival in cold blood. Jocelyn remained still. The defence, in turn, painted her as a woman driven to madness by circumstance, a tragic victim of an industry that values beauty over talent, that discards those who fail to shine bright enough. Yes, she committed a crime, but do we not see the cruelty that led her to this breaking point? Poirot studied her carefully. He saw no remorse in her eyes, no guilt, only a deep, hollow emptiness. The verdict was swift. Guilty. The sentence, life in prison. As she was led away, Jocelyn finally looked toward Poirot. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wished to say something. But in the end, she said nothing at all. The last look in her eyes, however, would stay with Poirot for a long time. The final bow that evening, Poirot and Hastings returned home. The case was over, the killer punished, justice had been served. And yet Poirot felt no satisfaction. As he sat at his desk, he found himself staring once again at his own reflection. "Do you see something there?" Hastings asked. Poirot exhaled. "Only a reminder, mon ami." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Of what?" Poirot turned away from the mirror. "That the greatest mysteries are not those solved with logic, but those that reside in the hearts of men." Hastings sighed. "You always have to be dramatic about these things, don't you?" Poirot smiled faintly. "A detective must have his final bow, Hastings." And with that, he picked up his hat, dusted it off, and placed it neatly on the stand. Tomorrow there would be another case, another crime, another mystery to solve. But tonight he would allow himself to sit in silence, listening to the echoes of laughter that had long since faded. For even in victory There are some cases that never truly leave you. Chapter 11. Echoes of Laughter. The Weight of Justice. Hercule Poirot sat in his armchair, his fingers resting lightly against his temples. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls of his London flat. Hastings, seated opposite him, studied his friend with mild concern. "Poirot, you've hardly said a word since the trial. I should think you'd be pleased with how things turned out," Hastings said, stirring a spoonful of sugar into his tea. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly. "Pleased, Hastings? No, I do not believe that is the correct sentiment." Hastings frowned. "Well, justice has been served, has it not? Jocelyn Raines has been found guilty, and the law will deal with her accordingly." Poirot sighed and leaned forward. "Justice, mon ami, is a peculiar thing. The law punishes, yes, but does it prevent? Does it correct?" Hastings hesitated. "It holds people accountable." Poirot nodded. "Oui, but it does not undo the crime. Lillian Harper is still dead. No verdict can change that." Hastings exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I suppose you're right. But that's how the world works, isn't it? People make choices, and they must live with the consequences." Poirot's sharp eyes met his. "And what of those who must live with the consequences of another's choices?" Hastings was about to answer when a knock at the door interrupted them. A visit from the past Miss Beatrice Langley, Lillian Harper's close friend, stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. Poirot gestured for her to enter, offering her a chair by the fire. "I hope I am not disturbing you, Monsieur Poirot," she said softly. "Not at all, mademoiselle. How may I assist you?" She hesitated, glancing down at the delicate gloves in her lap. "I wanted to thank you for uncovering the truth, but also to ask you something." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Go on." Miss Langley's hands trembled. Did Lillian deserve it? Hastings nearly choked on his tea. "Good heavens, Miss Langley, what an awful thing to say!" Poirot remained silent, his expression unreadable. Miss Langley pressed on. I don't mean she deserved to die, but did she deserve what happened before? The humiliation? The laughter? Was she truly so cruel?" Poirot sighed. "No one is purely one thing, mademoiselle. We are all capable of kindness and cruelty alike. Lillian Harper was not an innocent angel, nor was she a villain. She was a woman who lived in a world that rewarded wit and ambition. And yes, she laughed. But tell me, do we all not laugh at another's misfortune at some point in our lives?" Miss Langley swallowed. "Jocelyn let it consume her." "Oui," Poirot agreed. "But it was not the laughter alone that turned her to murder. It was her own perception of it, her inability to move beyond that moment. Many are mocked, yet they do not all kill." Miss Langley's eyes filled with tears. "It just feels so pointless." Poirot's voice softened. "Murder is always pointless, mademoiselle. It takes, but it never gives." She wiped at her eyes and stood. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I think I needed to hear that." Poirot inclined his head. "Grief is a long road, mademoiselle. Be kind to yourself as you walk it." With a small nod, Miss Langley left. The door clicked softly behind her. Hastings let out a breath. "That was rather grim, don't you think?" Poirot glanced at him. Murder is a grim business, Hastings. Unfinished threads Hastings reached for the newspaper folded beside him. The front page bore the headline, "The Laughing Killer. Stage star, sentenced to life in prison." He skimmed the article. It says here that Jocelyn Raines showed no emotion when the verdict was read. He paused. Do you suppose she feels any regret? Poirot exhaled. Regret is a curious thing. Some feel it for their actions, others only for being caught. Hastings frowned. And which do you think applies to her? Poirot was silent for a moment. I believe she regrets losing control, not the crime itself, but that she allowed herself to be exposed. Her ego was as much a victim as Lillian. Hastings shivered. That's a chilling thought. Poirot nodded. Indeed. Hastings flipped through the paper, pausing at a smaller column. Ah, look at this. It seems that Madame Estelle, the fortune-teller from the theatre, has disappeared. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Disappeared? Hastings nodded. Yes, the paper says she was last seen the night before the trial, then vanished without a trace. Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. Curious. She was a woman full of secrets. Tell me, Hastings, do you recall the note I found in her dressing room? Hastings frowned. The one that read, "A debt must be paid"? Poirot's eyes glinted. Precisely. I wonder, was Madame Estelle merely a fortune-teller, or was she something more? Hastings set the newspaper down. Do you think this could be connected to another crime? Poirot smiled faintly. The world is full of mysteries, mon ami, and I do not believe our work is quite finished yet. Hastings groaned. Oh, Poirot, I was hoping for a rest. Poirot chuckled. Ah, but where is the fun in that? Come, Hastings, let us see where this new thread leads. As Poirot stood and retrieved his hat, a thrill of anticipation lit up his eyes. The case of the Laughing Killer was over, but another mystery was just beginning. Chapter 12. The Fortune-Teller's Final Prophecy. The evening after Jocelyn Raines was sentenced, Poirot and Hastings dined at their usual haunt, Simpson's in the Strand. The case of the Laughing Killer had been concluded, yet Poirot remained pensive, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the table. Poirot, do stop that, Hastings muttered, cutting into his roast beef. The case is closed, and justice has been served. Surely you aren't still thinking about Jocelyn Raines? Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. I am thinking about something else, something that does not fit neatly into our previous puzzle. Hastings sighed. Let me guess, Madame Estelle? Ah, you have used your little grey cells at last. Poirot smiled, but his eyes remained serious. Tell me, Hastings, does it not strike you as most curious that a woman who dabbled in secrets, whose very presence at the theatre was an enigma, should suddenly vanish without a trace? Well, fortune-tellers are often charlatans, Hastings said with a shrug. Perhaps she fled to avoid questions. Poirot lifted a newspaper from his coat pocket and laid it on the table. A small column in the lower half of the page read, Mystic vanishes night before verdict. Madame Estelle, famed theatre clairvoyant, last seen entering her lodgings on Hartnell Street. Neighbours report hearing strange noises, but no sign of the woman has been found since. Scotland Yard declines to comment. Hastings set down his fork. Strange noises? What sort of noises? Poirot's gaze narrowed. That, Hastings, is what we shall discover. A house of shadows. The next morning, Poirot and Hastings arrived at Hartnell Street, a quiet, unassuming row of terraced houses. Madame Estelle's residence was marked by peeling paint and a tarnished brass number on the door. A nervous-looking landlady greeted them. "Madame Estelle?" She wrung her hands. I haven't seen her for 3 days, sir. She came home late that night, and there was a commotion." Poirot's moustache twitched. "A commotion, madam?" The woman nodded. "Muffled voices, like she was arguing with someone. Then a loud thud." Hastings frowned. "And you didn't check?" The landlady looked embarrassed. "I knocked, but no answer. When I opened the door the next morning, she was gone. But I swear she never left through the front. The locks were still bolted from the inside." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Aha! A locked-room mystery, Hastings." Inside, the air was thick with incense. Tarot cards lay scattered across a velvet-draped table. Poirot moved about methodically, inspecting the room. Hastings hovered near the window. No sign of forced entry. If she didn't leave through the front, could she have escaped through the back? Poirot gestured to the dust-covered floorboards. No footprints. And observe, mon ami, her crystal ball remains on the table. Would a woman who planned to flee leave behind the very tool of her trade? Hastings frowned. Unless she didn't plan to leave at all. Poirot murmured, "Precisely." A message from the cards Poirot studied the tarot spread left on the table. 3 cards faced upright. The Hanged Man, Sacrifice, Suspension, being trapped. The Tower, Sudden Chaos, a shocking event. The Moon, Deception, Hidden Truths, Illusions. Hastings glanced at them. "You don't believe in that nonsense, do you, Poirot?" Poirot chuckled. "No, Hastings, but Madame Estelle believed in them, and that makes them significant." He flipped a 4th card that had been placed face down. The Fool. Poirot's expression darkened. Someone was playing a dangerous game. At that moment, a faint scratching sound came from behind the bookshelf. Hastings spun around. What the devil was that? Poirot moved swiftly, pressing against the wooden panel. With a soft click, a hidden compartment sprang open. Inside lay a small notebook, filled with hurried, frantic handwriting. Poirot scanned the pages, then muttered under his breath, "Mon Dieu!" Hastings leaned over his shoulder. "What does it say?" Poirot's voice was low. She feared for her life. She believed someone was watching her. The final entry reads, "He knows. I should not have helped her. But the past does not stay buried." "Poirot," snapped the book shut. "Hastings, we must pay a visit to Scotland Yard, immediately." 3. A Web of Secrets. At Scotland Yard, Inspector Japp met them with a weary expression. "I should have known you'd be sniffing around, Poirot. Don't tell me you think this has something to do with the Rains case." Poirot settled into a chair. "But of course, mon ami. Everything is connected. Tell me, what do you know of Madame Estelle's past?" Japp sighed. "Not much. She came to London a few years back. No known relatives. Worked in the theatre, built a reputation as a mystic." Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. "No relatives, you say? And yet she writes of the past not staying buried." Japp hesitated. "Look, Poirot, between you and me there's a rumour. Poirot leaned in. Aha! And what is this rumour, mon cher Japp? Japp rubbed his forehead. Some say Madame Estelle wasn't always a fortune-teller. Some say she was once someone else entirely. Hastings raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Japp lowered his voice. Some old records suggest she might have been a stage actress years ago, but one night there was an accident. Someone died. She vanished after that, only to resurface later under a new name. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A ghost from the past, perhaps. Japp exhaled. Whatever it is, she knew something she wasn't supposed to. Poirot stood, his expression serious. Then, mon ami, we must find out what. A new mystery unfolds as they left Scotland Yard. Hastings shook his head. First a murder, now a disappearance. Poirot, do you think Madame Estelle is still alive? Poirot's lips pressed into a thin line. I think, Hastings, that someone wanted her to disappear. The question is, did she leave of her own will? Or was she taken? A gust of wind rustled the newspaper in Hastings' hands. He glanced at the front page again. The laughing killer sentenced. Justice prevails in high-profile case. But at the bottom of the page, in small print, another headline caught his eye. Mysterious woman found dead in Thames. Authorities seek identification. Hastings' blood ran cold. Poirot, you don't think... Poirot turned to him, his gaze unreadable. Come, Hastings, we must see for ourselves. And with that, the great detective strode off into the mist, ready to chase another enigma. Chapter 13. The Woman in the Thames. The damp chill of a London morning clung to the air as Poirot and Hastings made their way toward the city morgue. The article in the newspaper had been brief, but its implications were clear. A woman's body had been pulled from the Thames, and authorities had yet to confirm her identity. Hastings strode beside Poirot, his hands stuffed into his coat pockets. Poirot, do you really think it could be Madame Estelle? Poirot kept his gaze forward, his expression unreadable. Hastings, a woman disappears the very night before a guilty verdict, having whispered of danger. A body is then found in the river. Coincidence? He tapped his temple. Non, mon ami. There is no such thing. Hastings exhaled. Well, I certainly hope you're wrong. Poirot said nothing, but his silence carried the weight of an answer Hastings did not wish. To hear? The unclaimed body at the city morgue. Inspector Japp was waiting for them, his usual gruff demeanour tinged with weariness. Knew you'd show up, Poirot. He gestured toward the corridor. Come on, let's get this over with. They followed him into a dimly lit room where a sheet-covered body lay on a metal table. A deep silence filled the space. The only sound was the distant drip of a leaking pipe. Japp hesitated, then pulled back the sheet. Hastings held his breath. The woman's face was pale, her dark hair tangled with debris from the river. Though swollen from the water, there was no mistaking her sharp cheekbones or the faint trace of makeup clinging to her lashes. Poirot gave a small nod. It is her. Japp sighed. Damn, that's what I was afraid of. Hastings frowned. Ah, you sure, Poirot? The water? Poirot lifted the woman's hand gently. A silver ring adorned her index finger. A coiling serpent with emerald eyes. The ring, Poirot murmured. She wore it when we visited her lodgings. A woman as superstitious as Madame Estelle would not part with her talismans. This is her, mon ami. Japp cleared his throat. Well, cause of death isn't drowning. Hastings turned sharply. What? Japp pointed to the woman's throat. A dark bruise wrapped around it like a sinister necklace. She was strangled before being dumped in the river. A cold weight settled in Hastings's stomach. Murder! Poirot's voice was quiet. Mais oui. The mark of the murderer Poirot adjusted his cuffs and leaned closer to the body, his keen eyes scanning every detail. Mon cher Japp, what else do we know? Japp consulted his notes. Not much. Body was found near the Southwark Bridge early this morning. No belongings, no purse, nothing to identify her. Poirot frowned. And yet she was identified. He tapped the ring on her finger, which means her killer did not intend for her to vanish completely. They wished for her to be found. But why? Japp shrugged. Maybe to send a message. Poirot's expression darkened. Perhaps the killer is not as clever as they believe. He straightened. Come, Hastings, we must return to Madame Estelle's lodgings. There is something there I must examine again. Japp crossed his arms. You've already been through her place. What are you looking for now? Poirot's moustache twitched. For the one thing a fortune-teller fears most, the truth. A hidden past revealed back at Madame Estelle's lodgings. The scent of incense still lingered in the air, though it had begun to fade. Hastings watched as Poirot moved about with quiet precision, his fingers trailing over the tarot cards left. Abandoned on the table. Poirot, Hastings said, what exactly are we looking for? Poirot gestured toward the locked compartment in the bookshelf, the one they had discovered before. Something has been bothering me, mon ami. This notebook. He lifted the journal they had found earlier. Mentions someone she feared, but she does not name them. Hastings frowned. Perhaps she was too afraid. Perhaps. Or perhaps Poirot reached into the compartment again, feeling along its edges. A moment later, his fingers found something wedged in the back. A thin slip of yellowed paper. Hastings leaned closer as Poirot unfolded it. The ink was faded, but the writing was clear. A theatre playbill. The name at the top read, The Tragedy of Blackmore House, starring Eleanor St. Clair. Hastings blinked. Who the devil is Eleanor St. Clair? Poirot smiled grimly. A ghost, Hastings, one that has just come back to haunt us. A connection to the past. Poirot wasted no time. Within the hour, they were seated in the office of a retired theatre director, Mr. Alistair Graves, a thin man with an impressive collection of whisky bottles on his desk. At the mention of Eleanor St. Clair, the old man paled. Now, there's a name I haven't heard in years. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me, monsieur, who was she? Graves exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Eleanor was a rising star, brilliant actress. But then there was the accident. Hastings sat up. Accident. Graves nodded. Opening night of the tragedy of Blackmore House. A freak accident with the stage rigging. A man, one of the supporting actors, was killed. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And what became of Eleanor? Graves hesitated. she vanished. Silence settled over the room. Poirot tapped the playbill. "Monsieur Graves, is it possible that Eleanor St. Clair and Madame Estelle were the same person?" Graves' expression darkened. "I wouldn't be surprised. If she was hiding something, she'd have changed her name." Hastings exhaled. "But why kill her now, after all these years?" Graves looked away. "Because someone must have found out the truth." Poirot rose. "Merci, monsieur. You have been most helpful." As they stepped outside, Hastings shook his head. "Poirot, this is madness. We've gone from murder to missing, persons to stage tragedies. What does it all mean?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It means, Hastings, that Madame Estelle did not die for who she was. She died for who she had been." The hidden hand the evening fog rolled in over London. Poirot sat in deep thought. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but one question remained. Who had discovered the truth about Madame Estelle, and why did they kill her? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Japp entered, his face grim. "Poirot, we have a lead. Witness saw a man arguing with Estelle outside her home the night she vanished. Tall, dark coat, scar on his cheek." Poirot's brows lifted. "A scar, you say?" Japp nodded. "Witness swears to it." Poirot tapped his fingers together. "Then, mon ami, we must find this man at once." Hastings shivered. "And what if he finds us first?" Poirot gave a small smile. "Then, Hastings, we shall see if he enjoys playing games with Hercule Poirot." Chapter 14. The Scarred Man's Secret. The thick London fog swirled around the gaslit streets as Poirot, Hastings, and Inspector Japp made their way toward the East End, where their witness claimed to have seen the scarred man. The air smelled of damp stone and distant coal fires, and the steady clip of their shoes echoed against the cobbled pavement. Hastings pulled his coat tighter around him. "I don't like this, Poirot. If this fellow is dangerous, shouldn't we have more officers with us?" Poirot lifted a brow. "Mais non, mon ami. The element of surprise is our greatest advantage." Japp scoffed. "Assuming he doesn't surprise us first." Poirot stopped in front of a small run-down pub called the Black Swan. Its sign creaked in the wind, and dim light flickered through its grimy windows. "Our witness mentioned that the man frequents this establishment," Poirot said. "Shall we?" Japp sighed. "I suppose there's no talking you out of this." Poirot straightened his cuffs. "Not at all, mon cher." A dangerous encounter inside, the Black Swan smelled of stale ale and damp wood. The clientele was rough, a mix of dockworkers and men whose eyes darted too quickly. Poirot scanned the room, his gaze landing on a lone figure at the far end. A man nursing a pint of stout, his dark coat draped over his shoulders. Even in the dim light, the jagged scar across his cheek was unmistakable. Japp motioned to Poirot and Hastings. "I'll handle this." He marched toward the man. "Oi, you!" The man barely looked up. "Not interested." Japp pulled out his badge. "You will be interested, mate." The scarred man stiffened. His hand slid toward his coat pocket. Poirot acted before Japp could, smoothly sliding into the seat across from him. "Ah, monsieur, you have the air of a man with a most fascinating story." The man's eyes narrowed. "Who the devil are you?" Hercule Poirot. He gestured to the others. You already know Inspector Japp, and this is Captain Hastings. Man scowled. Don't know you, don't want to. Poirot smiled pleasantly. Ah, but you do know a certain Madame Estelle, n'est-ce pas? The man froze. A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, crossed his face. Never heard of her, Japp growled. Try again. We have a witness who saw you arguing with her the night she vanished. The man's jaw clenched. Poirot steepled his fingers. You see, monsieur, there are only two possibilities. Either you are innocent, in which case you must tell us what you know, or you are guilty, and we will have no choice but to treat you as such. The man exhaled sharply. He reached into his coat. Hastings tensed. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and slid it across the table. Poirot picked it up. It was an old photograph. A younger version of the scarred man stood beside a beautiful woman with piercing eyes. The woman looked very much like... Hastings gasped. Good heavens, that's Madame Estelle. The man spoke, his voice rough. Her name wasn't Estelle. It was Eleanor St. Clair, and she was my sister. Duque, lost brother Japp whistled. Blimey! Poirot placed the photo down carefully. You are her brother. The man nodded. Name's Vincent St. Clair. I hadn't seen Eleanor in over 10 years. Hastings leaned forward. Why did you argue with her? Vincent exhaled. Because I found her. He shook his head. For years, I thought she was dead. Then, a few weeks ago, I caught wind of a woman in London calling herself Madame Estelle, a fortune-teller who knew an awful lot about things she shouldn't. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You believed she was using her old connections? Nodded. Eleanor, she wasn't just an actress. She knew things. People confided in her, especially those in power. But she disappeared after the accident at Blackmore House. Hastings frowned. You mean when that actor died? Vincent's hands clenched. It wasn't an accident. Japp straightened. You mean to say... Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mes amis. He turned back to Vincent. Did Eleanor, Madame Estelle, tell you who was behind it? Vincent hesitated. Then, slowly, he shook his head. She wouldn't say, but she was afraid, said she was being watched. Poirot tapped his chin. And then, 2 nights ago, she was murdered. Vincent's knuckles went white. I should have stayed. I should have... Poirot held up a finger. Non, non, monsieur. Regret will not serve us now. Only action. Vincent looked at him, his eyes burning. Then tell me, Poirot, who killed my sister? Poirot's voice was soft but firm. That, monsieur, is what we are about to find out. A new target. The next morning, Poirot sat in his apartment, deep in thought. The threads of the case were weaving together, but the pattern was still incomplete. Hastings paced. Poirot, I don't see how this all fits together. Eleanor, Madame Estelle, was hiding her past. Someone from that past found out and killed her. But who? Poirot sighed. Mon ami, you see, but you do not observe. Hastings threw up his hands. Then enlighten me. Poirot stood. Consider, Hastings. Madame Estelle whispered of danger. She feared she was being watched, and she was murdered just as she prepared to reveal something. What does this tell you? Hastings hesitated. That That the killer wanted her silence? Poirot nodded. Exactement. A knock interrupted them. Japp entered, his expression grim. Poirot, we've got another problem. Poirot arched a brow. Ah, mon cher. Japp. You bring news? Japp exhaled. Not news, another body. Hastings paled. Another murder. Japp nodded. Vincent St. Clair. A terrible silence fell over the room. Poirot closed his eyes. Mon Dieu! Japp handed him a small slip of paper. We found this in his coat pocket. Poirot unfolded it. The words were written in smudged ink. He knows too much. Poirot's expression darkened. Hastings, Japp! We must move quickly. Hastings swallowed. Where to? Poirot's voice was ice. To find a killer before they strike again. Chapter 15. The Shadow Behind the Curtain. The discovery of Vincent Saint. Claire's body changed everything. What had been a complex murder investigation had now escalated into something far more dangerous. A silent killer moving through the shadows, eliminating those who got too close to the truth. Poirot sat in the dimly lit sitting room of his Whitehaven mansion's apartment, his usually neat hands resting on the arm of his chair. He was still, his expression unreadable, his little grey cells working furiously. Across from him, Inspector Japp stood with his arms crossed, his face tight with frustration. 2 murders, Poirot, and both linked to this blasted fortune-teller. You've got to tell me what you're thinking. Hastings, pacing near the window, stopped. Japp's right. Whoever this is, they're getting bolder. Poirot let out a slow breath. Bolder? Non, mon ami. They are desperate. Japp frowned. How do you figure that? Poirot tapped his fingers together. Vincent St. Clair was no ordinary man. He was a survivor, cautious and secretive. And yet he was silenced. Why? Hastings hesitated. Because he knew something? Précisément. Poirot leaned forward. But what did he know? That is the question. The secret of the stolen letters. Japp sighed. Well, we don't have much to go on. St. Clair's body was found near the docks, but there were no witnesses. The only thing he had on him was that note. He knows too much. Poirot nodded. Oui, and that is most telling. Hastings blinked. It is. Poirot stood and retrieved a small notebook from his desk. Let us review what we do know, Hastings. Madame Estelle, once known as Eleanor St. Clair, vanished for years before reappearing in London. She took up the role of a fortune-teller. Why? Hastings scratched his head. Well, I assumed it was just an easy way to make a living. Japp snorted. Humbug, more like. Poirot shook his head. No, mes amis, there is a pattern. She whispered of danger, yet she still reached out to Vincent. She still tried to contact certain individuals from her past, and... He paused, dramatically. She was in possession of something. Japp frowned. Something valuable? Poirot gave a small smile. Not money, my friend, but information. Hastings gasped. The stolen letters! Japp blinked. The what now? Poirot gestured for them to sit. Before her death, Madame Estelle told a close friend that she had been given certain letters, documents containing secrets that could ruin lives. Japp's eyes widened. Blackmail? Poirot nodded. Perhaps not at first. but she was using them for leverage, and she was murdered before she could expose the truth. Hastings hesitated, and Vincent, Poirot's face darkened. He must have found the letters. A heavy silence fell over the room. Japp exhaled sharply. Then that means, Poirot finished his sentence softly, the murderer does not yet have them. A dangerous game, Begins Japp swore under his breath. Then we need to find those blasted letters before the killer does. Poirot nodded. Indeed, and I have an idea of where to start. Hastings perked up. Where? Poirot smiled faintly. Where does one hide something that no one would dare to look? Japp groaned. Poirot, if you're going to answer your own riddles, at least do it quicker. Poirot stood and retrieved his coat. We return to Madame Estelle's apartment. There is something I must confirm. Hastings hesitated. Do you think the killer has been there? Poirot's gaze was sharp. They will be, and soon, Japp cursed. Then let's move. The apartment and the unseen watcher, the apartment of Madame Estelle was just as they had left it. Silent, untouched since the last investigation, the scent of old incense still lingered in the air. Poirot moved swiftly to her writing desk. He ran a gloved hand over the wooden surface, then turned his attention to the ornate mirror above it. Hastings frowned. What are you looking for? Poirot hummed. Not what, who? Japp stiffened. You think someone's been watching this place? Poirot nodded. Indeed. He turned suddenly. Quickly, mes amis, hide the light. Hastings hurried to shut the curtains, and Japp extinguished the lamp. They stood in darkness. Poirot whispered, Now we wait. For several moments there was nothing. Just silence. Then a sound, a faint creak from the hallway. A shadow passed beneath the door. Japp's hand moved to his revolver. We've got company! Poirot held up a finger for silence. The doorknob twisted. Hastings held his breath. Then the door burst open. A dark figure lunged into the room, a glint of steel in his hand. Hastings barely had time to react before Japp's voice rang out. Stop right there! The man froze. In the moonlight, his face was revealed. Hastings gasped, It's Philip Marlowe! The truth revealed, Marlowe, one of Madame Estelle's former clients, was a well-known banker, a man with everything to lose. And now he was, standing in front of them, armed and desperate. Japp's revolver was steady. Drop the knife, Marlowe! Marlowe's eyes flickered between them. His hands trembled. Then, with a clatter, the knife fell to the floor. Poirot stepped forward. You were looking for the letters, were you not? Marlowe swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about. Poirot tisked. Mon cher, you do not lie well. Hastings clenched his fists. You killed her, didn't you? And Vincent St. Clair? Marlowe hesitated. Then, softly, he whispered, I didn't kill Vincent. Silence. Japp narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Marlowe looked at Poirot. I came here tonight to find the letters. Yes, I was desperate. But I didn't kill Vincent. Poirot's voice was calm. Then who did? Marlowe swallowed. I don't know, but I do know one thing. He looked up, his voice shaking. There's someone else hunting those letters. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, So we are not dealing with one killer, but two. The end